Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tensions in the Middle East have erupted once again, and this time, it's a confrontation no one saw coming. Israel and Egypt, two nations that have maintained a fragile peace for decades, now find themselves on the brink of a dangerous escalation. What started as a covert military operation inside Gaza has now spiraled into one of the most volatile moments in years, a chain reaction that could redraw the balance of power in the entire region. Reports from the ground confirm that Israeli forces have destroyed multiple underground tunnels along the Gaza-Egypt border, tunnels that Egypt claims were part of its own smuggling and intelligence operations. Israel, on the other hand, insists these tunnels were being used by Hamas and other militant groups to transfer weapons, fuel, and fighters between Rafah and Egyptian territory. But this action, carried out without coordination or warning, has infuriated Cairo. Egyptian military officials have accused Israel of violating their sovereignty, calling the strikes a reckless provocation. In response, Egypt's armed forces have reportedly moved tank battalions and air defense units closer to the Sinai border. For the first time in years, both Israeli and Egyptian troops are now operating on full alert. The peace that once seemed stable is now hanging by a thread. Sources say the tension began when Israel received intelligence that a major Hamas network had rebuilt smuggling routes underneath the Rafah crossing routes that allegedly connected Gaza directly to northern Sinai. These tunnels, according to Israeli reports, were being used to transfer Iranian light missiles and explosive materials. Acting on this intelligence, Israel launched an overnight operation using precision guided bunker buster bombs to collapse the tunnels deep underground. The explosions were so powerful that witnesses in Rafah described the ground shaking like an earthquake. Entire blocks were covered in dust and debris, and local residents reported hearing the thunderous roar of jets for hours. Within minutes, Egyptian radar stations detected the incursions, and Cairo immediately demanded an explanation. But by the time Israel issued a statement, the damage, both physical and diplomatic, had already been done. This event marks a dramatic turning point in regional relations. Egypt's president has called an emergency meeting with the National Security Council. While the Egyptian media, usually cautious when discussing Israel, is now openly condemning the strikes as acts of aggression. Political analysts across the Arab world say that Egypt, once a key mediator between Israel and Gaza, might now be forced to reconsider its alliance with Tel Aviv. On the Israeli side, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who defended the operation, saying it was necessary to ensure Israel's security and to prevent future attacks from Hamas. "We will act wherever terror builds its tunnels," he said, "and we will not apologize for defending our people." But even within Israel's own political circles, there are murmurs of concern. Some senior officials fear that angering Egypt could weaken one of Israel's only stable relationships in the Arab world, and isolate Tel Aviv even further at a time when it's already facing international criticism for its operations in Gaza. The destruction of these tunnels also reveals something deeper: a silent struggle for control over Gaza's future. For years, Egypt and Israel have had an uneasy understanding regarding Hamas. Egypt controls the Rafah crossing, the main lifeline for Gaza's population, while Israel controls the rest of the border. Both countries oppose Hamas's militant rule, but both also benefit from maintaining limited stability in the region. That fragile arrangement is now collapsing. As the smoke clears, satellite images show significant craters along the southern Gaza border. Egyptian engineers have been dispatched to assess whether their own infrastructure was damaged by the blast. Meanwhile, local eyewitnesses report seeing Egyptian soldiers reinforcing checkpoints and constructing new barriers, a sign that Cairo is preparing for any possible escalation. Internationally, the reaction has been swift. The United Nations has called for maximum restraint from both sides, while the U.S. has urged Israel and Egypt to avoid actions that could undermine decades of peace. But behind the scenes, Washington is deeply worried. American officials fear that if tensions between Israel and Egypt spiral out of control, it could destabilize the entire region from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. Iran, unsurprisingly, has been quick to exploit the situation. State-run media in Tehran praised the collapse of the Israel-Egypt coordination, calling it a crack in the Zionist alliance. Iranian analysts argue that the growing mistrust between Cairo and Tel Aviv could open new opportunities for resistance groups in Gaza and Lebanon. Hezbollah, too, has issued statements celebrating what it calls divine retribution for Israel's arrogance. In Gaza, Hamas leaders have remained publicly silent, but privately, sources suggest they are emboldened. The destruction of tunnels may have dealt them a logistical setback, but politically, they see Israel's confrontation with Egypt as a victory. The occupier has turned against its own partners. One Hamas official reportedly said, "This proves the instability of their alliances." At the same time, Egypt is now under pressure domestically. The Egyptian public, still deeply sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, is demanding a strong response. Crowds have gathered in Cairo and Alexandria, chanting against Israeli aggression and calling for the suspension of all diplomatic ties. Egypt's government, which has long walked a careful line between regional diplomacy and national pride, is finding that balance harder to maintain. The Israeli media, on the other hand, paints a different picture. Headlines call the operation a strategic success, claiming that the destruction of Hamas's tunnel network will cripple its ability to smuggle weapons and fighters. But some Israeli analysts warn that this may be a short-term gain with long-term risks. If Egypt retaliates diplomatically or militarily, Israel could find itself surrounded by hostile neighbors once again, just as it was decades ago. As the hours pass, both militaries remain on alert. Egyptian fighter jets have conducted low-altitude patrols near the border, while Israel's southern command has reinforced its defensive positions. Analysts say even a small miscalculation, a stray missile, an accidental crossing could ignite a direct confrontation. The geopolitical stakes could not be higher. Egypt is not just any regional power, it's the first Arab nation to sign a peace treaty with Israel back in 1979. That treaty has survived wars, uprisings, and political revolutions. But every treaty has its limits. If this conflict deepens, it could jeopardize decades of hard-won peace and plunge the Middle East into a new era of instability. For now, diplomatic efforts are underway behind closed doors. U.S. and European envoys are reportedly urging both sides to step back. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are offering to mediate, but trust once broken is hard to rebuild. The destruction of the tunnels may have been a tactical victory for Israel, but strategically, it has opened a new front of uncertainty. As night falls over the region, Israeli drones circle above the Rafah border, and Egyptian radars continue to track every movement in the sky. The border that once served as a fragile line of cooperation is now a potential flashpoint for war. Both nations are weighing their next moves, and the world is watching, holding its breath. If this crisis continues, it could reshape alliances across the Middle East. Nations like Turkey and Iran might seek to fill the diplomatic vacuum, while Western powers scramble to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. What happens next could determine whether the Israel-Egypt peace remains intact or becomes another casualty of the never-ending struggle over Gaza. One thing is clear: the fragile peace that held for decades has been shattered. And in a region already boiling with tension, even one more spark could ignite the flames of a broader war. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.